So thank you so much, Jason, for that very kind introduction. Like Jason said, and as you can see, I work as the Chief Communications Officer at Universal Avenue. And for those of you who are not familiar with Universal Avenue, I can quickly tell you that what we do is that we provide a sales force on demand to digital brands and companies. So these digital brands can essentially outsource their sales in part or as a whole to us. So our salespeople, our brand ambassadors, they act as digital consultants, and they go to small and medium-sized businesses, and they connect these innovative products to end customers on behalf of these brands. And we have a stand downstairs in the entrance, so you can go down to my colleagues, Georgios and Tom, and there they are. And they're happy to tell you more about Universal Avenue. So before joining Universal Avenue, I was working at a few various other startups, but I'm not going to go too much into all of that today, because I want to take this opportunity to talk about a topic that has become something close to my heart over the past few years. So before digging deeper into it, I'd like to give you some background. Before joining Universal Avenue, I was working for a food tech startup in San Francisco. And after resigning from that company in order to move back to Europe, I was doing a handover to my then boss and CEO. And given that he was the founder and CEO, obviously he was extremely knowledgeable in the company. He knew the team. So this was an extremely smooth transition and handover. So during our last handover meeting, I thought we were as good as ready to wrap things up. And then he kind of leaned in and he said, "Christina, I have one question for you." And I said, "Shoot, anything, fire away." And he said, "Those fluffy things that it is that you do, you know what I mean, those fluffy things. How can I do that? Do you have any advice for me?" That was a pretty defining moment for me, because in just one sentence and in one word, he had boiled down to what he thought of was the unique value that I brought to the company and the management. And it was this: fluff. As you can imagine, I was supremely pleased to hear that my work efforts over the past 12 months had been condensed down to such a flattering noun. And you're probably thinking, it doesn't sound great, right? You went to SF and that's what you brought? Yeah. Because you all know that this is what really matters when it comes to building a company. The things in the spreadsheets, the black on white, the numbers and the figures, the ones and the zeros, the cohorts, the customer lifetime values, the customer acquisition costs, the run rate, the valuation. And yeah, those things are important. They're the basic building blocks for any growing business. And we're not as far away from each other, you spreadsheet lovers and us fluff experts, as you may think. Because in the end of the day, we all want the same thing: black as opposed to red numbers. So hence, this is my topic for today. Because in a time when data seems to be king, I would like to advocate for the fluff. Because that fluff will turn into figures in your spreadsheets. So what did my boss mean when he asked me about fluff? So having worked in a few different tech startups by now, I've been around his type quite a lot. And he's a typical left brain-oriented kind of guy, an excellent problem solver, logical thinker, mathematician. And what tends to be put in the fluff basket are things that are hard to quantify, the abstract things, things that not always fit like a glove into a spreadsheet. Values, brand, leadership, motivation, social skills. I mean, we all have them, at least on paper, right? But do we really have them when it comes to that annoying colleague? Transparency, inspiration. You can see there's a lot of stuff, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of abstract concepts here. And you can also imagine that a fluff expert could keep him or herself pretty busy. Brian Chesky, the founder and CEO of Airbnb, made this exact point when he said, things that are hard to measure often get discounted. Things that are hard to measure often get discounted. But if you think about that for a second, just because something is hard to measure doesn't actually mean that it's less relevant or important. It just means that it's harder to measure, and therefore perhaps to compartmentalize and define. And I've seen this happen many times in startups. Senior leadership who's left-brain oriented, who discards the fluffy stuff just because it doesn't fit into a model, into a spreadsheet, because it's abstract, hard to quantify. But somehow, miraculously, those things seem to be coming back at some point and affect the business and impact the business somehow. So some of you in here may be thinking right now, all right, we get it, it's important, like we've heard those buzzwords before. But we're kind of building a good product here and trying to find that first product market fit and, raise some seed funding. So we'll worry about that later. And I see where you're coming from, because prioritization is key to any startup. In fact, it can be a make or break to learn how to prioritize the right thing. You should definitely scrutinize your products from what we call what's on a need-to-have basis and what's on a nice-to-have basis. Because in a startup, you can't do everything well. You just can't. You have to pick your battles. So a simple example of that is, do I need to hire another engineer to finish building this product? Answer may be, yes, I do. Need to have. Do I need to hire a head of sales to start selling this product? Maybe no. I can do the sales for self right now. Nice to have. But what I've noticed is that those nice to haves tend to often become needs to haves. And they tend to do so quite sneakily while you're busy focused away on solving the hard problems, right? It's a little bit like sunscreen. You were fine all year without it. And suddenly you step out on a summer day and you come back looking like this. So something that wasn't an issue at all has suddenly become a crisis. So the question is then, all right, what's one of these kind of nice to have that we should think about quite early on? So one good example there is leadership. When you're 4 people in a startup and everyone is doing everything from product to marketing to fixing the coffee machine, leadership skills is not necessarily the most essential thing in your business. But if that thing takes off, and 1 year later you have that hockey stick growth, and 1 year later you're employing around 100 people, if you then have a weak leadership, do you think that's going to affect your business? Do you think that's going to come down as a number in your spreadsheet? Yes, it definitely will. And when I'm talking about strong leadership, I'm not talking about a top-heavy organization, with some authority figure telling everybody what to do. That's not what I mean by a strong leadership. So my recommendation to you is, if you're expecting to employ people in your company, get a leadership coach already now. And yes, all the best leaders in the world have worked with advisor, experts, and coaches to improve their leadership and management skills. And good leaderships, it often comes down to authenticity. It's not about you becoming somebody else than who you are. It's about being comfortable in your own skin and improving your communication skills. And I've seen so many unnecessary events happen in growing companies because of lacking leadership or poor leadership. So this is something that you should focus on now. Do it for yourself and your co-founder. Offer it to coach hours to your team as it grows. I promise you, you will get ROI with abundance. Another thing that I would recommend you to do is to make sure to have the kind of foundation for your culture in place before your team gets so big that you're not managing everyone directly. So, and I'll get a little bit more into that, because amongst all this fluff, I've picked out one thing that can stand out as particularly fluffy, but also particularly powerful if done well. And it's a topic that's very close to my heart. It's culture, and more specifically, company culture. So, what is culture is the next question. Well, some people say that culture is what happens in your company when nobody's looking. Well, in reality, it's a little bit more complex than that. But the company culture is essentially the personality of your company. It's the environment in which your employees work. It's a set of behaviors, values, artifacts, reward systems that make up your organization. And you can often feel the culture when you walk into a company, because it's often evident in the behaviors and the enthusiasm of the people that work there, and often even in the space itself. And I don't know about you, but I've visited quite a lot of startups during my days, and it's just a big difference when you come into a place where there's like a vibe, a buzz, an enthusiasm. It's contagious, right? And just worth mentioning here, there's no such thing as a good or bad culture. We talk about weak or strong cultures, because if a culture is good or bad, that's quite subjective, right? Some people may love being in very clear hierarchies, like military style. They might thrive in that environment, whereas other people like a flat organization where there's a lot of personal accountability and everyone's the leader, right? So strong versus weak. So just give you a hands-on example of two companies who approached culture a little bit differently. So I don't know if you in here have heard about Lyft, but Lyft is a competitor, or Uber's biggest competitor in the US. So they're basically same product, a taxi service with an app that takes you from A to B. But when they launched, 3 years after Uber, in Uber's home market, San Francisco, they approached one thing a little bit differently. So the battle, at least at the time, for these two competitors was recruiting drivers. And at the time, Uber's brand promise was Uber, everyone's private driver, whereas Lyft's was Lyft, your friend with a car. This is a really good example of how brand and culture are two sides of the same coins. Because as you see, Lyft's brand promise went beyond being a marketing slogan. It incorporated behaviors from both the drivers and the riders. So for those of you who ever took a Lyft, especially back then, you'd know that the driver in the car would rock up, often with his quirky pink mustache on it. And instead of jumping in the back, as you would do in Uber's case, where you just let your chauffeur take you from A to B, the Lyft driver would say, jump in next to me. You would have a friendly chat, and you would let your friend take you to wherever you wanted to go. And this is obviously a fundamentally different culture, right? And it's kind of easy to see, since the battle was around the drivers, how a lot of people would be compelled towards being seen as somebody's friend instead of someone's chauffeur. So this became a key differentiator when Lyft basically launched in Uber's backyard, because it kind of ballsy things to do to launch in Uber's backyard and do so successfully. So I'm going to let you take a few seconds to read this famous quote from Gandhi for yourself. Why is culture important? Because if you don't have a strong culture, you can't pursue your destiny. And why that matters is that it becomes a sort of first principle that you can go back to in the company when you make decisions. It's a way for your employees to align around the values that matters most to the company. It provides a certain level of stability to fall back on. And it creates trust among the coworkers. And it doesn't only let you, enables you to know what to do, but also what not to do. And last but not least, it's a way for you to know who to retain and who not to retain in your company, because all people are not going to be a right fit for you and your company. So, all right, how do we approach it? We understand that it's important. How does the culture start? So like I said before, a lot of people think that, yes, culture is something that we'll figure out down the line when we're like 50 to 100 employees. But little do they know that by the moment that you recruit your first employee, even if you're 2 founders or more, you already have a culture attached. It's already kicked in, even if you're unaware of this. So your job as a founder is to cultivate and craft and shape this culture. So I've seen several startups do it this way. Oh, okay, we need to solve this thing with the culture. Let's have a 2-hour workshop. And then they sit down and they scribble down some nice sounding words, you know, do their mission statement, some values. They post it somewhere on their website and they think like, oh, phew, now we got that sorted out. And then they think that 2 years down the line, their employees are just miraculously going to adhere to these values and this fine vocabulary that they composed for them. Well, that doesn't really work now, does it? So then what should you do? So what I suggest is for you to incorporate, for instance, values into your performance reviews, if you have performance reviews, to not only evaluate people on their performance, but also how well they live up to the values that you've established as most important. And it's important that this is obviously done in 360 style, so it doesn't only go for if you have a senior management team, for example, they should be evaluated from their direct reports and peers and managers too. If you don't have performance reviews, another good idea is to reward employees that really embody these values that are so important, and to acknowledge them and recognize them for living up to these values. So to give you a couple of examples of values that I worked with previously, one was analysis over blame, which would encourage people to take responsibility if they did a mistake. We all do mistakes, instead of just passing on blame to someone else. Another was communication over assumption, because there's a lot of assumptions going on in startups, so it's really important to often over-communicate to clarify around any mistakes. But my point is, notice here how these values does not only suggest what to do, but also what not to do. A lot of companies approach it like this. Yeah, honest, that's a great value. Yeah, it's also a very bland value, because if you think about it, like, no one expects to go into the office in the morning and have lying as their daily habit. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. So what you should do is just put it a little bit more into context. So what LinkedIn did, for example, is that they defined it as constructive honesty, meaning that you should share your honesty as long as it's constructively helping the business forward. And LinkedIn is a good example of a company that's worked very actively on their company culture and incorporating the values. And Jeff Weiner, their CEO, is a huge advocate for the importance this effect and impact this has had on their business success. So when it comes to just, creating these values and thinking that people are going to follow them, it reminds me a little bit of when a parent says to a kid, they create a rule and the kid questions it, and the parent says, well, because I said so. That's a lazy parent, right? An engaged parent engages the child in that value, why it's important, and so on. And just to make that clear here, this is not about manufacturing some values. I mean, the values start with you as a founder. You're already going to have a sort of bigger vision and a mission in place, and you come in as a human being with values. So it's more to emphasize those values and distill down to which of those values actually support achieving your mission and your vision. So when it comes to values, we all know that this is really important as we grow up. We all know it's really important in our families to cultivate a strong values and a strong culture. But we somehow to be missing the importance of this when it comes to building successful organizations. But obviously, many of the best companies and leaders in the world know this. So like I said, LinkedIn is a good example. Google is notoriously famous for their company culture. You have Zappos, you have Brian Chesky, Airbnb. There's a lot of examples of leaders and companies who swear by the importance of company culture. So yes, this was about walking the talk, to actually use it in your performance reviews, to reward people who actually live from the values. And I want to take this opportunity to say that in this world that we now find ourselves in, where our societies and our politicians are being questioned on their values perhaps more than ever before, it's clear that we no longer live in a place where one size fits all. And I think that there may be an even bigger responsibility and opportunity here for our growing companies to play an even bigger part in terms of fostering and cultivating strong cultures and strong values. I'm very proud personally to work for Universal Avenue, a startup that launched 2014, but that is already employing 23 different nationalities across several markets. I think that's pretty remarkable. So even though some countries may be talking about tightening their borders, we're constantly expanding our horizons, looking for the best talent from all over the world, and constantly enriching our ever-growing team and community, and all gathering around the same mission and the same values. So here are some photos from our team and our brand ambassadors in different locations around the world. So on that topic of mission, it's also very important to have a clear mission and vision for your company. So Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter and Square, he said something I thought was really powerful a few years back at TechCrunch Disrupt. He said, "We don't want to disrupt things just to move things around. We want a direction, a sense of purpose." He said, "Pick a movement, a revolution, and join it." Because our generation, we don't just want to go into work and kill some hours and then get paid in the end of the month. We want something more, we want something bigger. It's sometimes referred to as big, hairy, audacious goals. And I know that sounds really American, but my point is here that I encourage you to share your vision, your goals, your missions with the people that you meet, and then let them decide if they buy into that. Encourage the people that you want to work with to invest their time in your purpose, in your mission, and make them feel a purpose by joining your company. And you said something good, because you're like, yeah, we're looking for world domination. Awesome, great, how? That is like what gets people going. Everyone wants to change the world, especially today. Look in the media. Everyone wants to do something to contribute. If you build a company culture of high engagement, it will act like a magnet. This magnetism will draw top talent in, and it will make it difficult for people to leave. Magnetism doesn't get more fluffy than that, right? However, you all know what it means, because we've all been to that party that is totally happening and that party that is dead. And it's hard to put the finger on what it actually was. Was it the music, the people, the venue, the lighting? But you can feel it, right? You can feel when there's a vibe and when you want to stay there and when you want to accelerate and keep going. And this is what it's about, right? And it comes down to attracting and retaining top talent. And this is what Google understands. They understand that if you create a strong culture, that will attract top talent. And if that top talent likes to come into work because of the environment that you created, you're onto something pretty good. All right. So you're with me this far. You understand that a culture is important. You understand, ways to lay a foundation for it, and how to make it not only just a talk, but actually incorporated in your daily life in the company. But how do you take it from here? How do you scale from that? I mean, you're on this ship. You've painted out your mission. You have the island that you're sailing to. You've streamlined the ship. Everyone is on board. Everybody knows what they need to do to get to this island. But how do you keep, if you're now building a fleet, how do you keep that going? How do you keep from diluting that? And that's a huge thing that a lot of companies have to work with as they grow, because it's a challenge, right? And my best advice for you here is to recruit on cultural fit. And that sounds easy, but it's actually really hard. Because if you worked at a startup, early days, you know that, even despite if you got an, acknowledgement in TechCrunch, we all know that it's more like being in a circus than in an actual company. So then when you suddenly reach a stage where top talent come knocking on your door with PhDs from places like Harvard or years of work experience from places like Google or Uber, it's quite hard to say no to those people. But if you want to streamline that fleet, and if you want to stay authentic to your culture, I would argue that apart from talent and skill and experience, cultural fit is as important, if not more important. Because if some of these ships just start twisting and turning around and start going towards another direction, you, as a captain, you're going to have a problem. So I understand that some of you in here may be choking on fluff right now. And I have something for you too. So the question you'll be asking is all this, is the output outweighing that input that goes into culture efforts, right? And that's a really valid question. And one way to answer this question is to look at employee satisfaction in correlation to financial performance. So Glassdoor did this study that they published last year where they looked at 3 pools of companies that all had been awarded with best places to work on Glassdoor. And then they looked at a pool of S&P 500 companies. And they pretended to invest $1,000 in each of these portfolios, and then they measured the stock performance over a few years. And as you can see, the portfolios with companies that have been awarded best places to work by far outperformed the S&P 500s. And the opposite seemed to be true as well. So they looked into 30 companies that scored the lowest in terms of employee satisfaction. And these companies significantly underperformed the stock market in the same period. So why is that then, you can ask?
Why does, companies that are seen as blessed places to work financially perform better than other companies? Well, I think this is often, weirdly enough, overlooked in companies, and it's almost that you can't see the forest because of all the trees. But happiness and productivity and engagement are very, very closely related. And there's a very interesting guy called Sean Aker, who is a psychologist, and he researches positive psychology. And he wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. And he found that the brain, it turns out, works a lot better when you have, when you're feeling positive. So he found that the greatest predictor of entrepreneurial success was optimism, because it allows your brain to perceive more possibilities, basically. Another one of his conclusions, a thing that he found, was that only 25% of job success comes down to IQ. 75% comes down to how your brain believes that your behavior matters, how well you connect to other people, and how you manage stress. Perhaps that is why Peter Drucker, the inventor of modern management, said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Let me sum a few things up. Things that are hard to measure often gets discounted. Nice to have often becomes need to have. No matter how good your product, if you can't build a great company, your product won't endure. So sorry to break the bad news here, guys, but your product is not larger than life. If you have 2 or more founders, your culture has already kicked in. Think harder and longer than you think you need to in terms of values. Walk the talk, live your values. For example, incorporate them in your performance reviews. Be clear with your mission and get recruits to buy into your revolution. Recruit employees based on both talent and cultural fit. Satisfied teams are proven to have big impact on financial performance, and happy people are proven to be more productive and successful. Don't neglect the fluff, folks. Thank you so much.